So I realize I didn't exactly address in the last episode why I was trying to dye this yellow fuel tank black instead of getting a new fuel tank. There are really not many black options for the Suzuki RM125. Clark makes one. I used it on the 03 build, but truthfully, it was not the greatest quality tank. It didn't seal properly on the petcock. I had to grind and sand and fix that myself to make it work. It leaked quite a bit out of the seal at the top of the tank. Overall, just not the highest quality tank that I wanted to put on this build. Now you can see, since the last video, I've been going to town on this thing, trying different things. Right now, it looks kind of terrible. I did get feedback from quite a few people on how I can effectively dye this black, but that is currently plan B. What I'm actually going to do is try Cerakoting this tank. I had a couple of people ask, why don't you just spray paint it? Spray paint doesn't hold up very well and is very likely to chip and deteriorate, especially on a gas tank subject to those fumes over time. That said, I chatted with Cerakote asking their opinion on coating a tank like this, and they told me Cerakote is highly resistant to chemicals and fumes like you'll find in a fuel tank. So why go for black when we can try and color match that gray? Full disclaimer, this is totally experimental. I have no idea if it's going to work or not, but let's find out. Since the last episode, I sanded the tank down with 320 grit sandpaper on an orbital sander, and then I wet sanded it with 2000 grit sandpaper to see if that would positively impact the dyeing process by opening the pores of the plastic, which it did not. To then prepare this tank for the Cerakote process, I degreased it and then loaded it up in my blast cabinet. This cabinet is using 100 grit aluminum oxide at around 90 psi. This is the exact same setup I use for metal, and I did nothing differently for this tank. Once it was fully blasted, I put it in the oven at 170 degrees to gas out any remaining oils or chemicals and evaporate any leftover water. After about an hour, I set up my makeshift spray booth and prepared the tank for coating. I set up wire on the bottom of the tank as well so I could flip it over to attain full coverage while spraying. I am trying a new color of Cerakote here, E240 Carbon Gray. Note this is part of the Elite series, and Cerakote recommended I use something from the C series for the tank, due to possible negative chemical reaction with gases that evaporate from the plastic. I ended up deciding to take my chances as I already had this color on hand and I wanted it to match the other parts that I'm coating this color. I mixed up the coating along with some catalyst and got to spraying. Once I was happy with the coating on the tank, I carefully placed it back in the oven for 2 hours. Cerakote recommends curing plastic at 150 degrees for 2 hours, but my oven won't go below 170, so that's what I did. 2 hours later, I pulled the tank out of the oven, and here are the results. Guys, I'm gonna be honest, I think I nailed it. This looks really good. I noticed it was a little bit of a rough finish, and that was probably because I used the same blast media that I do for metal, but I then wet sanded it with some 2000 grit sandpaper, and this tank has a lovely finish to it. It is dang close to the colors of the plastic, and I think it looks really good. For my first time ever Cerakoting plastic, I'm considering this a big win right now. Before I get too excited, let's see what it can withstand. We'll do the scratch test somewhere the tank will be hidden by plastic. I know that's a terrible sound, nails on a chalkboard sound, but that is full pressure with my fingernail. Like I'm actively trying to scratch the coating off. Like I said, Cerakote is also supposed to be highly resistant to fuel and other chemicals, so we're gonna simulate a little fuel spillage here. That's some mixed gas. A little nervous for this part, gonna full on blast it with some contact cleaner. Now if this were spray paint, that paint coating would be gone. Spray paint does not hold up to contact cleaner. And would you look at that? Full on blasting, no noticeable change to this coating. Obviously, I'll need to see if the results are any different when this thing has fuel inside it for a sustained period of time, but to survive that gas test and scratch test with no ill effects whatsoever, I am very pleased with this tank, and I think Cerakote might be a very real solution for changing the color of a fuel tank. Now, while I had that batch of Cerakote mixed, I took advantage of it and coated a few engine components, including the cylinder covers and water pump cover. I had an idea in my head of what these two grays would look like together, and I could not be more pleased. While you watch this water pump cover installation and realize how good this looks, here's a reminder that you can actually win this bike when it's finished, along with an expenses paid trip to come out to Montana and ride with me. At the time of this recording, there are just 78 people entered, so your odds are pretty solid. Links are in the description to get yourself entered, and a portion of all entries are going directly to Daniel Schmidt to support his goal of racing the Pro Nationals. Now, I would like to thank Boyson for providing a rad valve for this bike, which is an upgraded intake and reed valve. Reeds are an often overlooked but very simple upgrade for your two-stroke, and Boyson has built a very reputable name for themselves with these components. Again, as I mentioned last video, you might notice I am not torquing any of these bolts right now, as they will soon be replaced with black. Switching gears from the engine, it is about time I provide some attention to these brakes. For the brake system, I've got a couple upgrades, including a complete Honda front brake that I found on MX Locker, which updates the brake line routing and has a bit more stopping power. It utilizes the Suzuki front caliper mount and bolts up directly. As for the rear brake, I have a Honda master cylinder, which eliminates the remote reservoir and also adds a little stopping power. Cameron at Prime MX, may he rest in peace, developed this really cool brake clevis that adapts the Honda Master to the Suzuki, which I will show in more detail during brake install in a future episode. The frame requires very slight modification for this Honda Master to fit. There is one small tab that needs to be trimmed to avoid contact. With a cutting bit on the rotary tool, I filed that down and then smoothed it out with a Prime MX wheel. The brake line stopper on the Honda Master can also benefit from a slight trimming to allow the brake line to fit properly. With those two tasks done, this Master is fit to this frame, and I slice off the hanger where the remote reservoir line would route. It was then time to completely disassemble the brakes and prepare them for Cerakote and a total rebuild. I also want to Cerakote the kickstart pivot to match those gray engine accents, so I disassembled the Kickstarter. The kicker bolt is generally pretty tight and required some heat and an impact screwdriver to break that bolt. This kicker utilizes a spring and two balls as the locking mechanism to hold the kicker either in or out at that 90-degree pivot, so I carefully removed those. With the brake components torn down as well as other parts to be Cerakoted, you guys know the drill at this point. I degreased, masked, and blasted the parts, and here are a couple shots of the components before and after sandblasting. At this point, I had a unique thought. If Cerakote worked so well on the fuel tank, what is stopping me from coating the airbox as well? With the gray restyle kit, the airbox is the last piece of plastic remaining that is not gray. I completely disassembled the airbox, removed the old graphics, degreased it, and then spent a good hour scrubbing a bunch of 20-year-old grime out before it hit the blast cabinet. With all of these parts fully prepped, let's get to Cerakoting. Once I had sprayed and racked all of the metal components, I put them in the oven to cure for an hour, and during that time, sprayed the airbox. Now, the metal components cure at 300 degrees, while the airbox only needs 150. So I left the oven open to cool, and to speed up the process, opened my garage to let some frigid air in. Look how much freaking snow we have outside right now. The airbox cured in the oven for 2 hours, and to pass the time, my girlfriend and I went to the trampoline park.
Rock and roll been in my blood since I heard old Stevie Ray Texas flood. With the band so tight, tune down low. I wanna play that music in the speakers blow.
Parts successfully coated. Let's rebuild these brakes. And with the brakes 90% of the way there, to completely finish these up, I need to wait for some freshly replated hardware to return. But man, did these look gorgeous. Thanks to ProX for the rebuild kits and brake pads, and with the kickstart pivot coated, I could reassemble the Kickstarter. I utilized a new O-ring and plenty of grease, and this thing now pivots like it's brand new. I slipped the Kickstarter onto the engine along with a brand new shift lever. Note, these RMs have a spot on the case where the shifter will hit if not splined properly, which I learned the hard way on Levi's RM125 a while back. I split the case on that thing multiple times before realizing this was the issue.
Are you kidding me? Jesus. This is some sick joke.
So I'd like to give a quick thanks to my past self for making sure I don't make the same mistake twice. And with that, there really isn't a whole lot left to do on this RM125 until I get that hardware back from Nick's Vapor Honing Services. All of the little bits and pieces are slowly coming together, and this thing is going to go from a pile of parts to a dirt bike all at once. I'd like to give a quick shout out to my buddy Chris. All of the music in this video is from his band Nothing Good. So thanks to those guys for letting me use their music, and their Spotify link is down below. Again, if you are not yet entered for your chance to win this RM125, now is a great time to do so. The link is down in the description. This bike will go to one of you when it is finished, and you can come out to Montana and ride it with me. Hardware will be back soon, so in the next episode, this bike will really start taking form. Be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss any episodes in the series, and I'll be resuming progress on that CR500 build very soon as well. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.